"Sign here," the lawyer said, sliding the document across the mahogany table. Maria's hands trembled as she stared at the number $847 million. The billionaire's children stood behind her, their faces twisted with rage. "That gardener is stealing our inheritance," Patricia screamed. But what happened in that conference room 60 seconds later would leave everyone speechless. Stay with me until the end, because this story will restore your faith in humanity. Before we begin, take a second to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and comment below where you're watching from. Trust me, you'll want to stay until the very end, because this story has twists you won't see coming. Now, let's begin. Maria Gonzalez had dirt under her fingernails, not the kind that washes off after a long day of work, but the kind that settles deep into the creases of your skin after 12 years of working the same soil, tending the same gardens, watching the same seasons change on someone else's estate. The kind of dirt that becomes part of you, a permanent testament to what you do and who you are in a world that rarely notices people like her. She was 42 years old, though her hands looked at least a decade older than that. The relentless California sun had weathered her skin into something resembling well-worn leather, dark and deeply lined, and bearing the permanent marks of decades spent working outdoors in all kinds of weather. Her back carried the perpetual stoop of someone who had spent the majority of their adult life bent over flower beds, pruning roses with careful precision, pulling stubborn weeds from between paving stones, coaxing beauty from the earth with patience and skill that most people never noticed or appreciated. But despite all the physical toll that years of manual labor had taken on her body, despite the aching joints and the permanent calluses, and the way her lower back sent sharp pains shooting down her legs on cold mornings, Maria's eyes still held something soft and warm and fundamentally kind. There was a gentleness in the way she looked at the world, a quality of attention and care that people noticed even when they were actively trying not to see her at all, even when they desperately wanted her to remain invisible. The Henderson estate sprawled across 40 magnificent acres in the heart of Palo Alto, one of the wealthiest zip codes in the entire United States, perhaps in the entire world. This was where tech billionaires and old money families lived behind imposing iron gates and perfectly manicured hedges that cost more to install and maintain than most Americans would earn in a lifetime of full-time work. The property itself was a genuine masterpiece of landscape architecture, the kind of place that appeared in glossy magazines and coffee table books about the world's most beautiful private gardens. There were manicured lawns that looked like green velvet stretched across gently rolling hills, rose gardens that bloomed in impossible profusion from early March all the way through late November, carefully curated collections of flowering trees imported from Japan and France and South America, and ancient California live oaks that had witnessed more than a century of the state's dramatic transformation from wild frontier to the technological and cultural capital of the modern world. Maria arrived at the estate every single morning at exactly 6 o'clock, just as the first fingers of dawn were beginning to paint the eastern sky in delicate shades of pink and gold and lavender. She would arrive when the air was still cool and fresh, when dew clung to every blade of grass like thousands of tiny diamonds catching the early light, when the world felt new and full of quiet possibility. She let herself in through the service entrance, a discreet door hidden behind a magnificent wall of night-blooming jasmine that most visitors to the estate never even noticed existed, never knew was there at all. Then she would disappear into the gardens that had become infinitely more familiar to her than her own small apartment across the bay in East San Jose. Gardens she knew in ways that went beyond mere visual memory. She knew them with her hands and her back and her nose, knew them through years of patient observation and careful tending. She knew every single rosebush on the property by name, could recite the Latin classification of every plant in the extensive and valuable collection, and understood the subtle language of growing things in a way that most people never would, never could, no matter how many books they read or classes they took. She knew which cherry tree bloomed first each spring, an old Yoshino variety that had been planted near the south wall decades ago, and always seemed to sense when winter was truly finished and it was finally safe to unfurl its delicate white blossoms. She knew which sections of the lawn needed extra attention and supplemental watering during California's increasingly severe droughts, and exactly where the expensive irrigation system had weak spots and failing connections that required constant monitoring and frequent repair. She knew where the soil was too acidic for certain plants and where it was too alkaline, where the drainage was poor and where it was excellent, where the afternoon sun was too harsh and where the morning shade lingered too long. The gardens were her masterpiece, her cathedral, her greatest artistic achievement, even if absolutely nobody ever knew her name when they wandered through and admired the carefully orchestrated symphony of color and texture and seasonal interest that she had designed and maintained with such devotion. When the Henderson family hosted their occasional charity events and high-dollar fundraisers, guests would wander the immaculate grounds with crystal champagne glasses in their perfectly manicured hands, marveling at the absolute perfection of everything they saw. They would comment enthusiastically on the brilliant color combinations in the perennial borders, the elegant classical structure of the formal rose garden, the way the purple wisteria cascaded over the Italian pergola at exactly the right angle to catch and filter the afternoon sunlight into something magical. They would take photographs to post on their social media accounts, carefully framing shots that would make their friends and followers envious. But those wealthy, privileged guests never thought to ask who had created all this breathtaking beauty. They never wondered whose artistic vision and years of backbreaking labor had transformed 40 acres of California hillside into something that belonged in the pages of Architectural Digest or Garden Design magazine. They never noticed the woman in practical work clothes who occasionally appeared on the very edges of their vision, quietly pruning a wayward branch or deadheading spent flowers, or checking soil moisture levels. Maria was completely invisible to them, just another brown-skinned woman in humble clothing, part of the complex infrastructure of servants and workers that kept wealthy estates running smoothly and beautifully, as unremarkable and unworthy of conscious attention as the plumbing system or the electrical wiring hidden in the walls. And for most of her career, for most of her entire adult life really, Maria had accepted that invisibility as the natural and inevitable price of steady employment in a world that wasn't particularly interested in seeing people like her, people who existed to serve. She had learned long ago, through painful experience, that invisibility was actually safer than visibility, that blending seamlessly into the background meant avoiding the kind of unwanted attention that could cost you your job, your security, your ability to send money home to family members who depended on you absolutely. But Marcus Henderson had been profoundly different from every other wealthy employer Maria had worked for during her 20-plus years in the landscape industry. When Maria first came to interview for the prestigious position of head gardener at the Henderson estate 12 years earlier, she had expected the usual routine that she had experienced dozens of times before. A brief, somewhat perfunctory meeting with an estate manager or head of household staff, maybe a quick walk through the property to assess her basic knowledge and verify her experience, a few standard questions about her credentials and references, and then either a job offer or a polite dismissal. She had been through this process so many times over the years that it had become almost mechanical, almost boring in its predictability. Instead, something completely unexpected happened. Marcus Henderson himself met her at the front gate of the estate, waiting for her personally rather than sending a subordinate. He was in his mid-60s at that time, tall and naturally lean with striking silver hair and penetrating dark eyes that seemed to see far more than they revealed, that seemed to look past surfaces into deeper truths. He wore expensive casual clothes, the kind of understated luxury that people who truly possessed generational wealth tended to prefer. Nothing flashy or ostentatious, no obvious designer logos or vulgar status symbols that screamed for attention. Just absolute perfection evident in every stitch and seam and subtle detail. A simple white linen shirt that probably cost more than Maria's entire monthly rent payment. Well-worn jeans that had clearly been custom-tailored to fit his frame perfectly. Leather shoes that had been handmade in Italy by craftsmen whose families had been making shoes for centuries, carefully maintained and regularly polished for years. "Miss Gonzalez," he said warmly, extending his hand for a proper respectful handshake rather than the dismissive nod or limp condescending gesture she usually received from wealthy employers who saw her as beneath them. "Thank you so much for taking the time to come meet with me today. I've carefully reviewed your references and your portfolio of previous work, and I'm genuinely very impressed with your experience and your obvious dedication to your craft. But I'd like to walk through the gardens with you myself, if you don't mind taking the time. I want to understand how you actually see them, how you think about the complex work of maintaining and continuously improving a landscape of this particular scale and ambition." For the next 2.5 hours, something almost unheard of in job interviews for service positions. Marcus Henderson walked slowly beside Maria through every single section of the vast estate grounds. He pointed out specific problem areas where previous gardeners had struggled and ultimately failed, sections of the property that had never quite achieved the vision his late wife had held for them, places where something fundamental wasn't working correctly. He asked Maria's informed opinion on difficult drainage issues in the lower meadow where water pooled after winter rains, on integrated pest control strategies for the valuable rose collection that was suffering from recurring problems with black spot and aphids, on whether the massive ancient oak trees near the eastern boundary needed any kind of intervention from a certified arborist, or whether they should be left completely alone. He listened with genuine interest and obvious attention, actually processing and considering what she said rather than just pretending to care while his mind was elsewhere. He asked thoughtful follow-up questions that showed he was truly engaged with her answers, that he wanted to understand her perspective and methodology. "These gardens were my wife's greatest passion," Marcus told her as they stood in dappled shade beneath one of those magnificent ancient oak trees, its massive branches creating a natural canopy above them. His voice carried a heavy weight of recent grief, the kind of profound sadness that suggested a wound still too raw and fresh to fully acknowledge or examine. "Catherine passed away just 6 months ago. Cancer. It was absolutely brutal and completely unfair, and it took someone who had never done anything in her entire beautiful life, except bring kindness and beauty into the world. Someone who made everything around her better just by existing." He paused for a long moment, looking out over the carefully tended grounds that stretched away toward the distant hills beyond the property line, clearly lost in memories that brought both comfort and pain. "I desperately need someone who will care for these gardens the way Catherine did, someone who will love them and understand them, someone who truly comprehends that gardens aren't just decoration or status symbols or investments in property value. They're living, breathing things with souls and personalities and needs of their own. They require someone who will listen to what they're trying to say, understand what they truly need, treat them with genuine respect and infinite patience." Maria had felt unexpected tears prick the corners of her eyes at the raw, unguarded emotion in his voice. She understood loss in that deep, personal, visceral way that only comes from direct experience, from having walked that dark path yourself. Her own beloved mother had died just 3 years earlier, also from cancer, also after a terrible battle that had been brutal and unfair, and had consumed every bit of her mother's strength and all of her meager savings before finally claiming her life and leaving Maria alone in the world. "I'll care for them like they're my very own," Maria had promised, her voice thick with genuine emotion. "I'll make absolutely sure they honor her memory properly. I'll make sure that everyone who sees them, everyone who walks through them, understands they were created and lovingly maintained by someone who saw beauty as something sacred and important." Marcus had looked at her then with an expression she couldn't quite read or fully understand at the time, something complex that seemed to combine gratitude and recognition, relief and something much deeper that she didn't have adequate words for. It was as if he had been searching desperately for something very specific, something rare and precious, and had finally, unexpectedly, miraculously found it standing right in front of him. "I believe you will," he had said quietly, his intense dark eyes holding hers with a kind of focused attention that made her feel truly seen in a way she hadn't experienced in years, maybe ever. "I can tell just from talking with you for these few hours that you genuinely understand what this place meant to Catherine, what it still means to me. You're exactly the person we've been looking for, the person these gardens need and deserve." Maria got the job that very afternoon, the offer extended before she even left the property. She didn't even think to ask about the salary or benefits package until Marcus brought it up himself, and when he did, the numbers he quoted made her certain there must have been some kind of terrible mistake in the paperwork, some decimal point placed incorrectly. He was offering her nearly double what she had expected to earn, along with comprehensive health insurance that included dental and vision, 3 full weeks of paid vacation per year, and a generous retirement contribution that made her think someone in the Henderson organization's human resources department had made a serious error that would be corrected once the mistake was discovered. "Good work deserves good pay, Miss Gonzalez," Marcus had said simply when she stammered her surprise and confusion. "And I have a very strong feeling, an absolute certainty really, that you're going to do truly exceptional work here. You have a genuine gift for this." a real talent that goes beyond mere technical knowledge. And people with authentic gifts should always be compensated appropriately and treated with the respect their abilities deserve. He had been absolutely right about the quality and dedication of her work. Over the next 12 years, Maria poured herself into the Henderson Gardens with a level of devotion and commitment that went far beyond mere professional duty or obligation to an employer. She arrived early almost every single morning and stayed late more often than not, frequently working well past the official end of her scheduled shift because she noticed something that urgently needed attention, or because she was in the productive flow of a particular project and wanted to finish it properly rather than leaving it half done until the next day. She researched new horticultural techniques and disease-resistant plant varieties during her limited free time, studied integrated pest management strategies and sustainable landscape practices, took online courses in advanced horticulture and landscape design during her evenings and weekends to continuously expand her knowledge and refine her skills and stay current with evolving best practices in her field. She designed entirely new planting beds and completely renovated old ones that had become tired and overgrown and no longer served their aesthetic purpose. She always asked herself what Catherine Henderson might have wanted, working carefully from old photographs that Marcus had generously shared with her and the few brief but vivid descriptions he occasionally offered of his late wife's sophisticated aesthetic preferences and thoughtful gardening philosophy. She brought in special specimen plants from specialty nurseries that focused on rare and unusual varieties, created stunning seasonal container displays for the multiple terraces and courtyards around the house, and established a productive cutting garden that provided gorgeous fresh flowers for arrangements throughout the main residence year-round, even during the winter months when most gardens were dormant and colorless. But it was the relationship that slowly, carefully, almost organically developed between Maria and Marcus Henderson over those 12 transformative years that truly made her time at the estate so unusual and meaningful, that set it completely apart from every other job she had held during her 20-plus years of professional experience in the landscape industry. Most wealthy employers barely acknowledged their household staff beyond the absolute minimum necessary for basic communication about tasks and schedules. They issued instructions and occasionally complaints, but there was no real interaction, no genuine human connection. Maria had worked for enough rich families over the years to know the unspoken but absolutely rigid rules, the invisible but impenetrable boundaries that were never ever supposed to be crossed under any circumstances. You were expected to be efficient and competent and essentially invisible at all times. You didn't make direct eye contact unless absolutely necessary for understanding instructions. You certainly didn't initiate personal conversations or volunteer opinions about anything beyond your narrow specific duties and responsibilities. You existed purely to perform a particular function, and the less you intruded on your employer's consciousness beyond that strictly defined function, the better for everyone involved. Marcus Henderson seemed either completely unaware of these strict social rules or deliberately chose to ignore them entirely. He would often appear in the gardens during the early morning hours, a handmade ceramic mug of fresh coffee steaming gently in his hands, and walk the peaceful grounds with Maria as she mentally planned and organized her work for the day ahead. At first, during those initial weeks and months, she had been genuinely nervous about these unexpected encounters, worried that he was checking up on her work quality, looking for mistakes or problems, finding fault with her decisions about pruning schedules or planting choices or maintenance priorities. But she quickly realized with growing relief that Marcus genuinely enjoyed these quiet morning walks, that he found real peace and meaningful solace in those hours spent among the beautiful growing things his wife had loved so deeply. He wasn't inspecting her work or searching for problems. He was seeking human connection and companionship, a way to feel emotionally close to Catherine's memory, while also having someone thoughtful to talk to, who seemed to understand what the gardens truly meant on a level that went beyond mere aesthetics. Their conversations during those peaceful morning walks ranged far, far beyond the immediate topics of gardens and horticulture and landscape maintenance schedules. Marcus asked genuinely interested questions about Maria's family, her background, her life before she came to work at the Henderson estate. He wanted to know what books she was currently reading, what she thought about major current events and concerning political developments, whether she preferred classical music or jazz, what her youthful dreams had been when she was younger, and what dreams she still carried with her now, carefully protected despite years of disappointment. He shared stories about his own fascinating life with surprising openness and real vulnerability, He told her about growing up in a working-class neighborhood in Oakland, the only son of a dedicated postal worker and a devoted schoolteacher who had enormously high expectations for their children, but extremely limited financial resources to help them achieve genuinely ambitious goals. He described his unlikely journey from that modest background to building one of Silicon Valley's most successful early software companies, the tremendous risks and painful sacrifices, and occasional lucky breaks that had shaped his unusual path from poverty to almost unimaginable wealth. Catherine and I literally started the company in our garage, he told Maria one perfect morning, as they walked slowly past the spectacular David Austin rose beds that were just beginning their incredible late spring bloom, filling the air with their distinctive intoxicating fragrance. Everyone thinks that's such a cliché now, the stereotypical garage startup story that's been told a million times. But for us it was absolutely literally true down to the smallest detail. We had exactly one computer, a lot of enthusiastic ideas that probably weren't as good as we thought they were, and absolutely no real understanding of how to actually run a proper business. But we figured it out together through trial and error, learned by making terrible mistakes and then fixing them, built something genuinely successful through sheer stubborn persistence and countless 18-hour days when we barely slept or ate. He smiled warmly at the memory, but there was also unmistakable sadness woven through it like a dark thread running through bright fabric. The company made us wealthy beyond anything we had ever imagined or fantasized about when we were young and struggling and constantly worried about money. We went from seriously worrying about making rent each month to having more money than we could possibly spend in several lifetimes. But success is incredibly complicated, Miss Gonzalez. It gives you so very much, opens doors and creates opportunities that would otherwise remain forever closed and inaccessible. But it also takes things from you. Important things, essential things, things you don't fully appreciate until they're already gone and it's too late to get them back. What did it take from you? Maria had asked, surprising herself with the intimately personal nature of the question, the way it boldly crossed boundaries that employees absolutely weren't supposed to cross with their wealthy employers under any normal circumstances. Marcus had been quiet for a long contemplative moment, carefully deadheading a spent rose bloom with gentle, reverent fingers. "Time with my children," he said finally, his voice heavy with regret that was clearly still fresh and painful despite the passage of many years. Patricia and James grew up with full-time nannies and expensive boarding schools and summer camps, with every conceivable material advantage we could possibly provide for them, but nowhere near enough time with their actual parents. Catherine and I constantly told ourselves we were building their future, securing their legacy, making absolutely sure they would never have to struggle and worry about money the way we had struggled in our difficult early years together. He had looked at Maria with eyes that held genuine pain, real soul-deep sorrow that all his money and success couldn't touch or heal or make better. But we completely missed their present while we were so obsessively focused on securing their theoretical future. We missed important school plays and crucial soccer games and vital parent-teacher conferences. We missed the everyday moments that actually matter most, the little conversations and small adventures and quiet routines that build real, lasting relationships between parents and children. By the time the company finally went public, and we could actually afford to slow down our insane pace and focus more on our family, Patricia and James were already grown adults, already launched into their own independent lives, and we were strangers to each other in all the ways that really count, that really matter. He had shaken his head with the kind of profound regret that comes from truly understanding what you've lost and knowing with absolute certainty that you can never ever get it back no matter what you do or how much money you spend. "They call me father. They say the word when social situations require it, when it's expected and appropriate. But they don't actually know me as a real person with thoughts and feelings and fears and regrets. And I don't really know them beyond the most superficial details of their lives and impressive careers. We have perfectly polite conversations about their professional accomplishments and my various philanthropic projects and initiatives. But there's no genuine connection anymore, no real intimacy or deep understanding. I gave them absolutely everything material I could possibly give, but I didn't give them nearly enough of what they actually needed most desperately, which was simply my time and attention and consistent presence." Maria had understood that particular kind of regret on a deep, personal, visceral level. She carried her own painful version of it, shaped differently by wildly different circumstances but fundamentally expressing the same essential tragedy. Her daughter Rosa lived in Houston now, married to a man Maria had only actually met twice and working at some kind of corporate job Maria didn't fully understand despite Rosa's patient attempts to explain it. Their relationship was strained by all the years Maria had necessarily spent working multiple jobs simultaneously, just to keep them housed and fed. By all the time she simply hadn't been able to give no matter how much she wanted to. By the emotional distance that had steadily grown between them despite Maria's absolutely best efforts and purest intentions. "I send Rosa money every single month without fail," Maria had shared with Marcus, feeling safe enough with him after months of these conversations to reveal her own painful failures and deep regrets. "I helped pay for her college education when she couldn't get enough financial aid, helped significantly with her wedding expenses when she got married. Send regular checks now to help with her rent and living costs in Houston because I know she's struggling financially. She's always perfectly polite about receiving the money, appropriately grateful for the financial support that helps her make ends meet. But when we talk on the phone now, which isn't very often anymore, we don't really have very much to say to each other beyond basic logistics and practical matters. I don't know what she does on weekends anymore, or what makes her laugh, or what she talks about with her husband when they're alone together at night." She had felt hot tears prick her eyes as she continued speaking. "I worked so incredibly hard to provide for her, to make absolutely sure she had opportunities and options I never had. But somewhere along the difficult way I completely lost the actual relationship in my single-minded focus on somehow meeting all our urgent material needs. She has a mother who faithfully sends money, but I'm genuinely not sure she has a mother who really knows her deeply, or who she can comfortably come to when life gets genuinely difficult." Marcus had nodded slowly with the instant recognition of someone who understood precisely what she meant, who had lived that same painful paradox himself. "We give them what we can possibly manage to give under our particular circumstances," he had said quietly, thoughtfully. "We send money and resources and try desperately to solve their problems from a distance, from across whatever gap separates us. And we hope with everything we have that it's somehow enough to make up for what we couldn't give, for the presence and attention and time that our circumstances or our choices didn't allow us to provide. But it's never quite enough, is it? The money genuinely helps with immediate practical problems, but it doesn't create real connection or intimacy, or the deep sense that someone truly sees you and knows you and values you for who you actually are." It was exactly that kind of profound honesty and genuine vulnerability that had made their unusual relationship so meaningful, that had transformed what should have been a simple, straightforward employee dynamic into something that felt much more like authentic friendship between equals despite their vastly different circumstances. Marcus treated Maria as a complete equal in every way that mattered, as someone whose thoughts and feelings and opinions were genuinely valuable and worthy of serious consideration, as someone worth knowing and understanding beyond her narrow function in maintaining his expensive property. He valued her unique perspective on all sorts of matters, frequently asked her thoughtful advice on subjects that had absolutely nothing to do with gardening or landscape maintenance, and seemed to genuinely enjoy her company in a way that had nothing whatsoever to do with the valuable services she provided or her role as an employee. What Maria didn't know, couldn't have possibly known despite their growing closeness, was that Marcus Henderson had been watching her with a purpose and attention that went far, far deeper than simple appreciation for excellent work or enjoyment of pleasant conversation. He had been carefully observing absolutely everything about her with the intense scrutiny of someone deliberately looking for very specific qualities and particular characteristics that mattered enormously to him for reasons she couldn't begin to guess. He noticed the way she thoughtfully saved all the hedge trimmings and pruned branches to use as valuable mulch around other plantings instead of wastefully sending them off to the distant landfill, finding utility and value in what others would simply discard as useless waste. He saw the way she stayed late without ever asking for overtime compensation when an unexpected hard frost threatened the vulnerable citrus trees, prioritizing the welfare of the plants over her own time and money. He observed with great interest the way she treated all the other household staff with genuine kindness and natural consideration, generously sharing her carefully packed lunch with the housekeeper when the woman forgot hers at home, helping the elderly pool maintenance man carry heavy equipment even though it wasn't remotely part of her job description or responsibility. He watched carefully the way she interacted with his grandchildren during their rare brief visits to the estate, patiently showing them different interesting plants and insects, answering their endless questions with real respect instead of condescension, treating their natural curiosity as something genuinely valuable rather than annoying. He noticed that she never complained about anything, never gossiped about the family with other staff members, never took advantage of her position or the considerable trust he had placed in her. But Marcus Henderson was also observing something else, something far more significant that he never once mentioned to Maria, something that had brought him both profound joy and crushing guilt every single day for 12 long years, something that would eventually change absolutely everything for everyone involved. The first clear sign that something was seriously, urgently wrong came on an ordinary Tuesday morning in early March. Maria arrived at her completely usual time, pulling her old, battered Honda into the service parking area just as the first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the eastern sky with delicate color. But instead of the quiet, peaceful stillness she had come to expect and depend on at that early hour, the entire estate was alive with frantic activity and barely controlled crisis and palpable panic. An ambulance sat prominently in the circular driveway at the front of the imposing house, its red emergency lights painting the mansion's white facade in urgent, pulsing, rhythmic color that seemed almost aggressive in its intensity. Paramedics were wheeling a gurney out through the massive front doors, and even from a distance of 50 yards, Maria could see Marcus Henderson lying on it. His face was an awful gray color like ash. An oxygen mask covered his nose and mouth. His eyes were closed, and he looked small and frail and frighteningly vulnerable, so completely different from the vital, engaged, intellectually alive man she had spoken with just 2 mornings before. Her garden shears slipped from her suddenly nerveless hands and clattered loudly on the stone path. Patricia and James Henderson stood near the ambulance, both already dressed despite the very early hour, both with phones pressed urgently to their ears. Their voices carried clearly across the driveway with the sharp efficiency of people who were accustomed to managing crises and solving complex problems through superior organizational skill and sheer force of will. "Cancel my 11 o'clock meeting and push absolutely everything else to next week," Patricia barked into her phone, pacing in tight, controlled circles. "No, I don't know how long this is going to take. I don't know anything yet beyond the fact that my father is having a serious medical emergency. Just handle it. That's literally what I pay you for." James stood about 20 feet away, also on his phone, talking to someone in a low, urgent voice about stock portfolios and power of attorney and market implications. Neither of them rode in the ambulance with their father. Marcus Henderson died 4 days later on a Saturday afternoon. His heart, the doctors told his children, had simply decided it was finished. 78 years of beating, and then it stopped. Maria learned about his death from Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper. They sat together in the greenhouse, and Maria cried for the man who had treated her like a human being. 3 weeks later, Maria received a call from a law office requesting her presence for the reading of Marcus Henderson's will. The law office occupied a glass tower in downtown San Francisco. When Maria entered the conference room on the 40th floor, she saw Patricia and James Henderson with expensive lawyers. Miss Gonzalez, Robert Chen, the executor, said kindly, "You've been named as a primary beneficiary." Robert slid documents across the table. "Mr. Henderson has left you the estate and the majority of his assets. Approximately $847 million. This is insane," Patricia screamed. "She's stealing our inheritance." "Your father's will is legally binding," Robert said. "He drafted it 3 years ago while of sound mind." Robert pulled out a letter. "Your father wanted you to hear this." He read Marcus's handwriting. "Patricia and James, Maria Gonzalez is not a stranger. She is family. 43 years ago, I abandoned a woman named Elena Rodriguez, who was pregnant with my child. That child was Maria's mother. Maria is my daughter." Maria couldn't breathe. Elena Rodriguez was her mother's name. Marcus Henderson had been her father. "I hired Maria as my gardener so I could know my daughter without telling her the truth." Robert continued reading. "Those morning walks were the most precious hours of my life. I'm giving Maria what I should have given her 43 years ago." The room fell silent. Maria received Marcus's personal letter. It explained everything. Her mother had forgiven him before she died. Marcus hoped Maria could do the same. My mother forgave him, Maria said finally. She signed the inheritance documents. Patricia stood. Did you know who he was? I had no idea, Maria said. I believe you, Patricia replied. You're my sister. This will take time, but I'm trying. The weeks that followed were chaotic. Media camped outside. Through it all, Maria retreated to the gardens. Patricia appeared one morning. My mother knew about you for 15 years, she said, showing Maria Catherine's diary. She forgave our father and asked us to welcome you. Over months the siblings built a relationship. Maria established the Elena Rodriguez Foundation with $400 million, helping immigrant families and single mothers. She transformed the estate into the foundation headquarters and opened the gardens as a free public park. Patricia and James joined the foundation's work. 1 year later they gathered at Marcus's grave. Maria read her letter. I was angry you never told me the truth, but I'm grateful you saw me. I forgive you because my mother taught me that bitterness only poisons the person carrying it. The gardens bloomed. Families played on once private lawns. Maria walked the paths remembering conversations with her father. She understood now her mother taught her beauty grows from difficult soil. Her father taught her it's never too late to make things right. And her new family taught her that love doesn't always look the way you expect. The dirt remained under her fingernails. She was still a gardener, but now she was also a philanthropist, a sister, an aunt, and keeper of a legacy, teaching her that the most valuable inheritance isn't money. It's the choice to transform pain into purpose. What would you have done? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more stories reminding us that extraordinary transformations come from unexpected places.